We want to move the Department of Education. We're ranked at the bottom of the list, the worst. We spend more money per pupil than any other country by far, and yet we're at the bottom of the list.
Up in the morning and out to school.
In one household doing remote learning with one device. How does that work?
It doesn't work.
The average price of tuition, fees, room, and board increased by 169%.
College Board pretends to exist for the benefit of students while charging them unnecessarily high prices.
They're Marxists, they're communists. What they're doing to our country is incredible, but we'll take care of that for our children.
But we want to turn now to the sharp rise in book bans in America's schools and libraries.
Public education system in America is failing kids.
You're fortunate if you have time to eat. Back in the classroom, open your book. Keep it, the teacher don't know I mean.
Millions of young Americans spend the first 18 years of their lives in a classroom. 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, 38 weeks a year, young students funnel through the gates of education to prepare themselves for the world. In modern America, the education system is recognized as a fundamental part of society. However, this was not always the case. The evolution of education in America is layered and complex, largely due to how the education system has been weaponized and misused by political parties hoping to fulfill an agenda rather than simply raise a new generation.
We at the SSS set out to understand how American education evolved over the last 2.5 centuries, and we believe we've uncovered a deeper truth about our school system.
Despite the immense progress it has experienced, the education system in America ultimately hinders societal progress through the standardization of learning, inequality in education, and the influence of politics. There are 5 critical stages in the history of American education: pre-independence, pre-Civil War, the Civil War era, the High School Revolution, and finally, modern-day education. The exploration of these 5 stages will guide us on our journey to understand education's impact on American society.
The roots of the American education system stretch back to the days of the early American colonists.
Almost immediately after arriving in America in the 1630s, Puritan colonists began setting up a rudimentary school system. The first public school, the Boston Latin School, was established in 1635. Harvard was established a year later, and over the next century, many other Ivy League institutions were founded. At the time, these schools were exclusively dedicated to the teaching of religion. To train clergy for the New World, students at these schools would memorize tens of thousands of lines of the Bible throughout the course of their education. Religion had an enormous presence at this time, and because the education system naturally aligns itself with the values of society, the teachings at these institutions align with this. Following the American Revolution, our country began taking its first steps as a young nation, and it wasn't long before schools began to change. The revolution created a heightened sense of nationalism among the residents of this new nation, and with this came a strong desire to improve our country and our citizenry. As a result, the post-revolution era saw a gradual secularization of the education system, with the focus shifting from religious teachings to academics. Starting in the late 18th century, one-room common schools began popping up around the country. These schools were run by only a single teacher and would remain the only option for those living in rural areas for a century to come, as education developed further in cities, especially in the north. The establishment of common schools posed a new problem of how to effectively teach students of varying levels with only one teacher. To help the often undertrained staff, textbooks such as the American Spelling Book, published by Noah Webster, were written to progressively educate students of all levels.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Noah Webster. I'm an American scholar from the late 18th century.
And Mr. Webster, what motivated you to write your spelling book?
It was a strong desire to move away from the low quality and cheap British textbooks. It doesn't make any sense to raise a new American population if we're trying to be American using British textbooks. It's simply counterproductive to do it that way.
And what ways does your book teach kids to be American?
It's the way that the book not only teaches the language, but in addition the history that I speak of in this book. And it's essential to teach the young people of this country that in order to bring them up and create this American youth.
And how else have you contributed to American education?
I think my single other greatest achievement to American education would be my creation of the American Dictionary. We created a truly American English that could be taught to American youth. And as a byproduct of these new spellings, there was a stronger sense of American nationalism and an American identity was being created.
As the quality of education improved, so did its availability.
Massachusetts, where public schooling was already free for all grade levels, led the nation by establishing the first state board of education. This board, championed by Horace Mann, promoted equal access to education for all races, genders, and social classes, increased the length of the school year from 3 to 6 months, and advocated for better pay and treatment for teachers. Before long, states like New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland made similar changes and improvements to their education systems. The early 1800s saw a rate of improvement in accessibility, scope, and standardization in education across the country that outshines even the modern era. As a result of the new quality and equality of education, our nation was slingshotted forward into the 19th century with a bigger, more educated, and more innovative population. However, it is only a matter of time before progress in the education system is hindered by regional and national politics, and the education system drifts from simply preparing students to be high-functioning American citizens to becoming just another tool in the world of politics.
Are you a teacher in the 19th century? Are you constantly struggling to keep your students behaving? Do they keep skipping class? It took many months and countless hours of brainstorming, testing, and tweaking, but we have created the perfect classroom product, the ruler. Need to check how big your Bible is? It can do that. Need to discipline students? We've got you. Its steel-embedded edge will deliver maximum trauma to your problems. And the best part? This industry-grade discipline device can be easily disguised as a necessary classroom tool, so no suspicions will be raised. Buy your ruler for $9.99 to elevate your classroom experience to the next level. Email us at rulerforyou@gmail.com to solve your problems today.
The Civil War disrupted the steady progress happening in education at the time. As the divide between the North and South inflamed, the two vastly different social and economic situations created two contrasting education systems designed to uphold the status quo in their respective areas.
In the North, schools focused on building discipline in students to prepare them for the industrial-focused workforce of the region. Education in the region was also more widely accessible for all students, and the curriculum taught more progressive ideas. Meanwhile, in the South, schools sought to sustain agrarian social structure and its racial hierarchy. There were few public schools, limiting accessibility to education, and teachers taught ideas that restricted critical thinking and enforced social norms. To learn more about the differences in education in the North and South, we interviewed teachers in both regions.
This is Jackson Hayes, and he's a teacher in Fairhope, Alabama. I'm going to ask you a couple questions here. So how many people do you think in your town go to school?
I'd say of the 1,500 people that live in Fairhope, about half of them go to school, so maybe 750.
Northern schools placed a strong emphasis on teaching reading, writing, and math. Mr. Hayes, how important do you think those skills are in Fairhope?
They're important, and we definitely teach them, and I'd say teaching them is enough.
So, do you teach any other subjects or items?
We place a strong emphasis here in Fairhope on the importance and the greatness of the white male in society. As a white male, we are the greatest person in society, and we teach that strongly.
I see. That will be all. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hayes. We're in Norwich, Connecticut, and I have a couple questions for you. How many people live in your town, and does it have a school?
We have about 5,000 people living in our town, and yes, we do have a school.
What subjects are taught at your school?
A lot of English, a little bit of math, and we have a class named Patriotism. It basically teaches the students to be completely allegiant to the country.
That's very interesting. What methods does your school employ?
We do a lot of memorization, a fair amount of lectures, and that's about it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Of course, the most significant universal issue in education in the late 1800s was that of race. The Civil War created huge racial divisions in America, and the widespread belief that black people were intellectually inferior to whites led many educators and policymakers to argue that education should be tailored to the supposed intellect of different races. In the South, Black youth were denied access to education, and in the rare case that an African American was able to get an education, it was of very low quality and completely segregated from white students. Even in the relatively freer North, education opportunities for Black people remained severely limited, and it would not be until the 20th century that any focus on educational equality would occur. The ideological conflicts during the Civil War period, such as progressivism versus conservatism and freedom versus control, are still hugely relevant in today's educational debates. The modern struggle over how history should be taught in schools is a direct reflection of these tensions. Even in some states today, especially those in the South, the teaching of slavery, the Confederacy, and Reconstruction are intentionally misrepresented by educators in a political move to downplay the role of slavery and to portray the South in a better light. The Civil War wasn't just a war over slavery. It showed just how polarizing the education system could be, and how it could be weaponized to mold a society to fit the political ideals of the time. The Civil War continues to shape education today, not just in the extreme segregation it created, but in the precedent it set for how society and politics directly influences education. Following the Civil War, movement to create a fair, united American education system would slowly progress, but the social rifts created by the Civil War will never truly heal, permanently hindering the progress of education in America.
Going into the 20th century, the demand for high-quality education was increasing rapidly.
Rapid industrialization, particularly in the North, needed an increased educated workforce to sustain. Additionally, the 1900s saw a rise in professional jobs like doctors and lawyers that could only be filled by people with a higher education. Importantly, as a debtor nation and supplier in the First World War, America experienced a significant period of economic prosperity following the war's conclusion. World War I left Americans hopeful for a bright future where it was possible to achieve upward mobility through hard work. High schools, many believed, were the path towards this upward mobility. Prior to the 20th century, expensive private schools were the norm, giving opportunities only to the rich who could afford it. The publicization of secondary education broke down economic barriers and allowed low-income families to send their students to learn the skills necessary to gain higher-paying jobs and rise above their socioeconomic status. To match the societal demand for more educated Americans in the job field, the United States built a historical amount of secondary schools in a period known as the High School Revolution.
We interviewed a 20th century historian to learn more about this time period.
How significant was the High School Revolution?
It's hard to overstate the importance of this period to education. So between 1910 and 1940, high school attendance rate increased by around 5 million, which is a 500% increase. And the number of high schools built also more than doubled. So after the High School Revolution, America led the world in secondary school attendance by a wide margin.
I'm assuming African Americans had it way worse than white people. How true is this?
Well, the state of African American schools at this time can be connected to Jim Crow laws and the Supreme Court ruling that Black people were separate but equal. Now, this meant that Black facilities, including schools, could be completely segregated from white facilities as long as whoever ran them acted as though they were giving the African Americans equal opportunity. But in reality, nobody actually cared if the schools were actually equal, and colored schools were underfunded and rarely taught well enough for Black students to rise the social ladder. Basically, states were using schools as a way to undermine African American freedom.
What I'm getting from this is, you're meaning that schools were weaponized in the name of politics?
Exactly.
On May 17, 1954, to the joy of all African Americans, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the landmark case Brown v. Board of Education that segregated schools were unconstitutional, legally abolishing them. Later, the remaining Jim Crow laws were repealed completely by the Civil Rights Acts of 1964. However, these actions failed to eliminate educational inequalities. To this day, schools have huge funding disparities as a result of the economic situations in their districts, which are often directly correlated to racial demographic. The High School Revolution created an influx in secondary school enrollment, but it also expanded inequality in education that has yet to be repaired. And, until it is, the American education system cannot adequately serve its purpose and has failed its country.
Ugh, time to pull another all-nighter for my exam. I'm kind of tired. I got an F on my Jillecke test!
Has this also happened to you? Worried about it happening to you in the future? Are you willing to do anything to make sure it won't? Now introducing the Red Bull Extreme. Compared to a normal Red Bull, the Red Bull Extreme has 20 times the caffeine concentration. Unlock the 25th hour of the day to maximize your studying. Not only will you be able to stay awake, but with the help of our dual dosage technology, Red Bull Extreme has a built-in shot of melatonin so you can fall asleep immediately after you finish studying. For a limited time, get 2 for 1 if you call today. Health risks include cardiac arrest, schizophrenia, seizures, dysentery, insomnia, Stockholm syndrome, vision loss, depression, anxiety, and death. Do not attempt at home. SSS is not responsible for any injuries or deaths.
That brings us to where we are today, the modern era of education, where technology, rising cost, and standardization drive our success for the future. But is our current education system really serving our students the best it can?
The modern era of education is inseparable from the technology we use that shapes how we learn, teach, and interact in school. It's redefining traditional learning methods and making new paths for educational inclusivity and future readiness. Technology has opened the doors for communication between students and teachers at a faster rate than ever, and has given people access to materials on a seemingly endless range of topics just through a few key presses. However, technology has also brought negative impacts, and with the power to access so much information so easily, artificial intelligence is often exploited by students to do assignments and even assessments automatically. We interviewed a member of the Mercer Island School Board to learn more about AI and our schools.
I hate artificial intelligence. That said, it is here. Students use it a lot, and the workarounds that teachers have to do really add a lot of time and effort. I'm hearing frustration from educators, and I certainly don't think we should be incorporating it in as a tool, but I think that it is already there as a cheating device.
Technology in education also brings into light the significant issue of inequality in society. Technology can exacerbate educational inequality by creating a digital divide, where students from lower income backgrounds lack access to necessary devices and reliable internet, preventing them from getting the same quality education as wealthier students. This disparity directly limits the future job opportunities of lower income students and serves to prevent the poor from rising above their class, instead giving far greater opportunities only to those who can afford it.
One difference in the Mercer Island School District and other school districts in Washington State is that we have resources available to us that other school districts don't, mainly through various foundations that all provide funding for necessary programs that should be funded by the state but are not adequately funded.
Perhaps the most identifiable aspect of our modern schools is the prevalence of standardized testing. Standardized assessments were first used in large numbers as a recruitment strategy in World War I, and in the decades to come, the nonprofit organization College Board created the SAT and advanced placement tests to help standardize the admissions process for universities. These tests soon became highly recommended and even required at many schools. However, this rise of standardized testing led to some serious problems. Because College Board had a monopoly over most of the tests students are required to take to get into a high-level college, they can charge criminally high prices for their tests, which only serves to further perpetuate the economic inequality in education. To add insult to injury, SAT and AP tests spawned an entire industry around test preparation, with many study services being priced outside the range of many low-income families.
What is your opinion on College Board?
Not a huge fan of the College Board testing program. They have a complete monopoly, but it is not an accurate reflection of a student's ability.
In addition to increasing the cost of education, standardized testing created a system where the purpose of many classes shifted from preparing students for college and beyond to just preparing them for an AP test at the end of the year. This shift only served to add to the all-too-common mentality that a student's fate is purely based on their grades and test scores, often restricting creativity and critical thinking in students. Economic problems only heighten after high school, as modern university tuition is at an all-time high and is increasing at an alarming rate. This poses a significant financial burden on students, especially those in underprivileged communities.
How is the cost of education rising? How does that affect students?
Like how much more expensive post-secondary education is in the United States right now. Like kids have to make a choice of, if you want to go to college, are going to probably have a huge debt if your parents haven't saved an enormous amount of money for you.
An additional problem of our education system is the limited curriculum at most primary and secondary schools. In most schools across the country, there are limited classes available to students, almost exclusively teaching materials deemed core by the government, primarily maths, science, history, foreign language, and English. However, this limits the ability of students to specialize in a subject before college, and funding issues often make it difficult for schools to simply add more classes.
Why doesn't the school district just add more classes to diversify?
I think that the district does a fantastic job of providing the widest possible variety of classes it can, given the limitations. But it is hard to offer everything in a very small school system.
These issues once again extend to post-secondary education, as colleges often fail to adequately prepare their students for the adult world. The current college system often prioritizes theoretical knowledge over practical skills, and many graduates find themselves lacking the skills needed to do their jobs after college. A strong education system is one that adequately prepares all of its students for the social and intellectual responsibilities of adulthood. However, due to prejudices and inequalities, governments and curriculum, and College Board and greed, the American education system has lost track of this goal. While the modern-day education system is undoubtedly a great improvement over the schools of the past, it is ultimately insufficient at meeting the needs of all students in America.
Throughout history, 3 factors have caused our school system to fail our students:
inequality, standardization, and politics. We learned how the pressures of society have constantly pushed our education system into becoming a mere pawn in the conflicts between differing politics and ideologies. We saw how this outside influence created great inequality in America, and how modern organizations like College Board expand this inequality through expensive standardized testing. This brings up the ultimate question: what can be done? Unfortunately, the issues plaguing our education system cannot be so easily removed. Economic inequality is only a single part in a complex web of political issues rooted in hundreds of years of history and often oppression that just can't be reversed in a few years. The rising cost of education because of College Board are equally difficult to resolve, because College Board's monopoly over the SAT and AP tests mean that any change would require a huge systemic undoing of decades of universities' reliance on College Board services. However, this doesn't mean that there is no hope for education in America. Across the nation, districts are pushing their local governments to give them more funding and help raise up lower-income schools. The switch of many universities to becoming test optional also reduces the negative impacts of tests like the SAT, and many school districts are pushing for more diversified curriculum despite economic limitations. Ultimately, schools must advance society, not just become byproducts of it. And while change is slow, we are slowly moving towards this ideal system of education. The only way for these current issues to be dealt with is with persistence, and for individuals and communities to raise awareness of the issues with our schools, and to keep pushing for solutions to be passed, no matter how much resistance they meet. The American way of education is far from perfect, but we as a country have come a long way, and we will continue to improve well into the future.
He's not gonna fall.
That's
Okay, now we
crazy.
have this- That one's the
Shroom.
edible one.
Shroom. Shroom.
I shouldn't laugh.
No!
Is it like cutie core if I tuck the hair behind my ears?
No.